It looks like I'm in the green room in another window.
We're live. We're live. Jacques, just hold on there. Hardy, good morning to everyone. Very exciting to connect in our virtual auditorium again for inspiration, practical wisdom, and really to everyone, welcome, a warm welcome on the 230th day of what's known as lockdown. And by the way, I heard this morning from Michaela that the Collins Dictionary word of the year is lockdown. Can you believe it? Such a kind of a bit of a negative word, but today we're going to swing that over. So welcome to Mill Park Business School's next episode in our Tomorrow is Beautiful webinar series. And yes, the good side, 43 days left until Christmas. Can you believe? Wow. And today, colleagues, friends, our guest is Jacques Snyman, who will share with us how not only to survive in the fourth industrial revolution, but how to thrive and make tomorrow beautiful. So just a bit about Jacques. He's a passionate teacher, general business consultant with years and years of experience in SMEs and program and project management, change management, leadership development, stakeholder relationship management, a full all-rounder as far as it comes to consulting. So more than 30 years experience locally, internationally, focusing on engineering, program management, organizational development and leadership, human resources and change, and business management, of course. Jacques' real passion is to help businesses do business better, in a nutshell, very simply, and implement large-scale transformational projects and change journeys, assisting individuals and teams on their development paths, sustainability, and greening the earth. Also a very important topic for where we find ourselves in. Jacques teaches integrated business strategy to MBA students and also supervises master's level research. Jacques, thank you for spending time with us this morning, and we are so looking forward to your insights. And without any further ado, it's over to you. Thanks, Jacques.
Thank you, Kobus. Much appreciated, and thank you for having me. It really is a privilege to share this morning with you and just share some thoughts in terms of the fourth industrial revolution. The next slide, Michaela. There's a lot, guys, that you can do in terms of making sure that you actually not only survive but thrive in the fourth industrial revolution, and you know all about that. You know all about the tech stuff. You know all about adoption of new technology and how to do that. What I want to touch on today is just give you a little bit of a background, maybe take a step back and see whether this fourth industrial revolution actually is real. Okay, so we'll go through a few things in terms of that. And then I want to touch on 4 aspects only. We've got limited time, so I want to touch on, so what is digital strategy and what does that imply and how do you use that? I also want to refer you and maybe give you a little bit of a heads up in terms of the brick wall that's coming in terms of strategic workforce planning, and that's not far off. And then the third thing I want to just quickly touch on is the role of communities and us as business and how we interrelate and interact and connect with our communities. And then the last one is just a quick reference to maybe a specific grouping of skill that we are not necessarily always aware of. This is based on very, very, very recent research. I mean, the book that I'm referring you to was launched literally 2 weeks ago. So I just want to look at future skills as well, and then I'll conclude by wrapping it all up and just making sure that I give you something practical to take with you going into the future. So it's 4 themes that I want to touch on. Next slide. So guys, what is this fourth industrial revolution? What's the definition of that? There's as many definitions as you can get, you know, to funky people to talk to you about this specific theme. But I think in essence, from a pragmatic and a practical perspective, it is the combined impact of all those things I've got on the screen and then some on our world, on our lives, and on us as individuals. Okay. If you stop and think about this, I think hand over fist, we in industry, specifically in terms of mining and so forth, are starting to implement the Internet of Things, no doubt. I mean, we are now integrating measurement and assessment and integration into centralized control all the production systems, essentially, all the peripheral systems are also now getting pulled into the bigger picture. And that automation and the IoT part is really carrying on at a speed of at a rate of knots. I think the aspects of 4IR that are still lagging behind, and you'll see that just now, includes things like nanotechnology, biotechnology, and AI to a certain extent, right? There are other things like, for example, solar PV, solar CSP, electric vehicles and things like that have gone up the Gartner curve, and we'll chat to that now. But essentially, it's the fusing of what we know as the physical world, that stuff that we can touch, right? And the digital world. But the big differentiator for me in terms of the fourth industrial revolution is the fact that it's integrating the biological world as well, guys. And it's impacting all disciplines, economies, industries, parts of the world. It will impact you as an individual as well, if you haven't noticed yet. Next slide. So why am I saying that the fourth industrial revolution is real? Guys, the physical foundations are in place. If you look at that caption, that quote, we already have today accurate and complete equations, right? The foundations of the physics and the chemistry and the engineering and the materials, it's all in place. So the table is set. If I spoke to you about this theme, I'm guessing 10, maybe 15 years ago, we probably still would have thought about and joked about flying cars, right? Today, that's clearly not science fiction anymore. It's an absolute reality. And all of these things are integrating and impacting on our lives, whether we want to know that or not. I'm not always sure that we are so aware of what goes on around us. My suspicion is that on a psychological level, we kind of choose to ignore certain of these things, kind of park it on the side because it's either too complex or too challenging or too new or anything like that. But I don't believe that we are necessarily in touch with what is going on around us regarding this 4IR shift every single day. So for me, it really is real because the foundations are in place. Next slide. The next very, very interesting aspect is that it's starting to move inside, guys. Okay, it's starting to move inside of us currently by things like wearables. Elon Musk the other day said that he will be ready with implants into the brain, and this is all for the good. Make no mistake about that. It's all for the good. He said the other day that he's going to start implanting certain sensors and actuators into the brain to actually help people with things like epilepsy and so forth. So all of that is definitely impacting the biology side of it. There are these days drops that you put in your eyes that will grow a lens for you based on the specific characteristics and requirements of your specific eye. So it definitely is going inside, and it is becoming a part of our lives. There's even thinking about, can I connect in? Can I tap in? Can I plug in with my brain into the universal brain? Think Google, think Facebook and things like that. Will that be possible? My concern here, and one of the big things that you and I have the responsibility to go and address properly, is the whole issue of ethics, okay? All of these social media platforms, guys, these days know exactly what we do, okay? They know, I think, sometimes a whole lot more about us than we know about ourselves. The ethics thing talks to privacy, and it talks to whether I want to allow other people to know what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, and so forth. So I think there's a huge discussion currently going on in terms of ethics, but it's also about the application of this technology of ours for the good as opposed to the bad or the evil. And there's clearly a big debate that we need to have regarding that. How are we going to regulate that? I think is still open for discussion, but I'm presuming that government specifically will be playing a very, very strong role in terms of the regulation and the ethics. Next slide. Here's a very, very interesting picture. And guys, I've even left you with a reference right at the bottom on this slide. So if you want to go check it out later on, it's Gartner.com. This is the so-called Gartner hype curve. Okay, this curve gets split per industry, per sector, per world, per part of the world, and so forth. So you can really go in to a level of detail if you want to. All the technologies are mapped on there as they move up this curve. I just wanted to lift out or accentuate a few of them. If you look at the curve and you look at the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity, clearly you can see that things like solar PV, passenger electric vehicles and things like that is already on that end of the curve, okay? We are done with it. As I said, the table is set. We're ready to rock and roll. The things that are still a little bit delayed or a little bit behind on that curve, where you still have to hit that disillusionment, if you want, that peak of inflated expectation, includes like artificial intelligence and synthetic biology. And here I'm talking specifically about what is referred to as artificial general intelligence, right? And that's the AI that is kind of mimicking or mirroring what a human being could be doing. Okay, so there's lots of debates again going on about that. Some people from Singularity and so forth are suggesting that we will hit that place where, at that point of singularity, if you want, within the next 20 to 30 years. Now that to me is a long shot, but anyways, there are people out there that think like that. So technologies go up this curve, guys, and they're moving up this curve at a rapid rate. That's part of the landscape of 4IR. Next slide. Okay, everything is changing really fast, and I think after having mentioned what is in place already and that it's going inside, 4IR, I'm pretty sure you'll agree, is just not hype anymore. It is absolutely a reality. The simple differences, apart from the fact that it includes the biological systems, and it really will become at some point, I guess, rather invasive. The change is fast and exponential, guys. It really is fast. So we expect the fourth industrial revolution to be something as big as what we are currently experiencing in terms of a global pandemic or a natural disaster of sorts. And this is where I'm going to ask you a question now, quickly. If you can put that poll up for us, Michaela, I'd really appreciate it. I've got one simple, quick question for you guys in terms of what do you expect the next big disaster to be? And I'm talking pandemic level kind of stuff, okay? The current global pandemic that we're experiencing, this really has had an impact on every single, I almost want to say living organism on this planet, but definitely on every single human being. So what do you think is going to be the next big one? The next big disaster, if you want? Where will it come from? Will it be man-made? Will it be natural? Just go to the poll and give me some of your responses or your thoughts. I just want to test your thoughts and your opinion a little bit. What do you think is going to be the next big one? Is it going to be a different virus? Is it going to be a mutation of the current virus? Is it going to be potentially a world war? Is it going to be some natural disaster that we might not even be, as the general public, too aware of? What do you think is coming next? Just before I share some additional thoughts with you. Credit bubble burst. Man-made stuff just like Corona? Yeah, absolutely. Could well be. Could very well be. Any other thoughts? You could even take that credit bubble burst further and talk about a total global economic collapse, which is something we, I think, in this process, got a little bit of a taste of. Okay. Michaela? There's some thoughts, guys. Okay. You see that I've split them into two. There's a slightly lighter gray box at the top. Now that's about solar flares or solar storms, right? And volcanoes and tsunamis. Believe it or not, but we live in a world where there's actually very dangerous volcanoes all around the show. South America specifically, Indonesia specifically, there's a whole bunch of them. There's the famous one that most people are talking about, which is the one in Yellowstone Park in the USA. Those guys are volcanoes that could erupt any day. And as we've seen, was it about 2 years ago when we had those eruptions? That impacts again on the economy like you can't believe. So there's definitely volcanoes that could happen. Now, there's other things that could happen, like tectonic plate slips, okay? And apparently, these are numbers that there's not even enough space in my head to understand this, but there are apparently some tectonic plate shifts that could happen that could cause a tsunami to the tune of a starter wave of about 400 meters tall, okay? So as I say, there's not enough space in my head to actually even understand that. I can't even imagine that kind of a wave. So there's natural things, most definitely, that could erupt any moment. Solar flares, we missed a specifically violent one in 2012. We missed a specific violent one in 2014. So we've been lucky in that sense. The scientists sit and they predict, and these solar flares, guys, are massive sun storms on the surface of the Earth, and that then has impact on us, on Mother Earth, in terms of all the magnetic interference that causes. Okay, so from a natural perspective, I think there's a few things that could happen any moment. Are we ready for that as a world? I'm not sure that we've proven that clearly to ourselves during this last crisis. Then there's a whole bunch of man-made stuff. Okay, there could be potential complete cyber shutdown. Okay, that's a very, very real possibility. If you look at the whole globalism drive right across the earth, then you would agree with me that some form of a populist uprising with a wave going right through the earth is a very, very definite possibility. A global famine because of how we manage the earth, our resources, and so forth, and how we either accept or ignore the whole issue of climate change could be disastrous for us. And then, of course, there's the obvious, always one sitting in the back of the mind, the nuclear holocaust possibility. There's still people that are fixing muscles against each other from that perspective. So those are all man-made issues, okay? And there are more man-made potential disasters than there are natural ones, although the natural ones we have never experienced, not in our lifetime anyways, and I don't believe that we are ready or know how to deal with them, okay? So as an organization, I think we need to get ready and we need to develop the tools and the skill and the mindset, I think, to be ready for the next disaster. Next slide, Michaela. Now that was 4IR, right? There's already talk, guys, and there's already themes being identified where people are starting to refer to the 5th industrial revolution, okay? So could some of these technologies, like, for example, artificial intelligence and all the biotech stuff and the nanotech stuff, could those branch off and cause yet another exponential revolution? I think there's a very, very real possibility if I look at what is happening around us in those spaces specifically. So there's not only 4IR, there's also potentially a next 5th wave of industrial revolution that is going to take place. Now, that's the bigger picture. That's the whole 4IR is real kind of world. Let's just for a moment think back to the short term right now. Where are we today? Next slide, Michaela. This is data, guys, that is no more than 10 days old. Okay, this is the short-term risk focus, and this is from the Gartner Group. Here they talk about the second wave. You clearly know what I'm talking about. Some form of a new working model. Everybody, every single one of us have been thrust into that. Remote talent management, how do you actually do that? Okay, and then very recently, like in 4 days, the 2020 US election, and then strategic corrections based on all of that. We're already seeing those shifts in the market, and nobody knows what's going to happen next. So those are all short-term risks that we need to focus on. That's all good. Every organization, I think, has got the responsibility to focus on those short-term things, to address them and to address them appropriately. But we need to not forget to keep our eye on the long term. And that's where the 4th industrial revolution comes into play again. Next slide. So some thoughts, some tips. I told you that once I've confirmed that the 4IR is real, I'll give you some tips and themes. Now, again, you need to focus on things like integration and technology and the strategy and so forth. What I'd like to touch on is those 4 aspects. The first one is that of digital strategy, okay? So what is digital strategy, guys? It's essentially you using technology to the best of your ability to actually improve stuff that you do in your business. It is that simple, okay? It impacts things, and you should focus on your business performance. You could be developing new products. You could completely redesign, redeploy, rethink your processes. In other words, that's how you do what you do on a day-to-day basis. And I think without a doubt, whether you like it or not, your business model is currently being challenged. Okay, so digital strategy also gives you the ability to actually get that done. In the end, guys, you will be able to actually develop new competitive advantages in this process. Okay, digital strategy for me cuts across all parts of the business. Okay, I think in the operations, it's pretty obvious. You do data analytics, you use that data to actually inform decision making, and that way you can optimize the process. You can do what you do better and better. In terms of R&D, all sorts of online ability, all sorts of being able to tap into other people's brains in a conglomerate is the kind of stuff that's happening these days. Finances, without a doubt, needs to make sure that it goes onto the digital drive, if you want. Marketing with all the social media that's available to us, and the whole new notion of digital marketing as opposed to the traditional way of doing marketing. If you don't get good at that, guys, I think you're going to just completely lose out. IT is the other obvious one, ITC. you have to think about things like data integration and the cloud and cybersecurity and all the other bits and pieces of technology that you need to address as an organization, not only to survive, but to thrive. At this moment in time, my thinking is that we are actually fumbling our way through it bit by bit. There is no unified definition accepted, for example, of digital strategy or digital transformation for that matter. But it is about us using technology to improve business performance so that we not only survive, but we actually thrive. So the one thing that I'd like to suggest you do to make sure that you survive this process is make sure that you understand digital strategy and what that specifically means for your organization. Okay, it's different for every single organization. I hear the comments every now and then from certain executives in business out there. Oh no, we've done it. We have digitized. Okay. And then after discussion, I have to find out that they've taken all their paper documents and made them electronic. Okay, that's not digital strategy. That's one small little component of a digital approach, yes, but there is much, much more to it than just that. So one needs to stand back and look at the strategy crafting process and make sure that you most definitely include the digital aspects in that. In the IBST model, we discuss this in a whole lot more detail. I think in the end, all strategy is going to become digital strategy. How long from now? A year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? I don't know, but it's not going to be a long, long time. I think it's going to be less than 10 years. So all of this can be used to reposition you and to develop new sustainable competitive advantages in your business. So do digital strategy most definitely. Next slide, Michaela. So digital strategy, that's almost the simple or the easy part of it. But what about the transformation that takes place? That transformation, digital transformation, guys, is all about the people. Okay, it is clearly about your organization and the culture within your organization. It's not only about the tech. Okay, touches essentially 3 high-level areas. It's about the customer experience, it's about your operational processes, and it's about the business models. But this needs to be a very, very well coordinated and integrated approach right through the business. Gone are the days where you could just pass this off to the IT department or the IT manager and let them get on with the business. Okay, this is a fully integrated process and approach, and it's major, massive change that we need to manage organization-wide. So think about this: customer experiences, operational processes, business models, because in the next example that I'm going to give you, next slide, Michaela, you'll see what I'm talking about. You remember these brand names, right? Kodak was one that we all grew up with. They've always been the leaders. BlackBerry was really a star in the 1998s, around about there, with the curved keyboard and the security systems was just second to none. Okay, what happened with these organizations, guys? They are there no more. Okay, I think it is in summary a matter of denial and ignorance. Okay, maybe a little bit of arrogance. Let's just be honest about this. We are just too big to not survive, right? There was with GM most definitely a profit focus only and a discounting of what customers want and what happens in terms of the competitive landscape. And with Kodak, undoubtedly, they just ignored the competition. Okay, BlackBerry, I think, was mostly that they chose to ignore the customer experience. Okay, and that caused them to go out of business. So there's critical, classical examples of businesses that just simply are not with us anymore. An interesting experience or exercise: go have a look at the Fortune 500 list today, and then take it back 3 years, 5 years, maybe even 10 years, and compare those two lists, and you'll see what I mean. Some of those organizations that were actually making up the world 10 years ago are not in existence anymore. So just have a look at that, and you'll see how those shifts take place. We can learn an awful lot as organizations, readying ourselves for the fourth industrial revolution from all these mistakes and errors that were made. Next slide. So that's the first thing about digital strategy and digital transformation. Okay, what's the next one? This one that I want to touch on, the second theme, is all about strategic workforce planning. What is that, and how does that work? That's essentially, guys, you planning for your organization to have the right skill at the right time in place, okay, at the right cost and quality. That really is what it's all about. In the olden days, it used to be essentially a headcount exercise, okay, spreadsheets with numbers in it, and we knew that we needed so many engineers, so many rocket scientists, so many accountants, so many whatever other skill we needed, and that was about it. Okay, the trends that are happening in terms of strategic workforce planning is the fact that it's moving now from a headcount exercise to really becoming part of strategy. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is, and this is something I've been purporting for years, we believe that strategic workforce planning is an HR function, right? So pass it on to the HR team, let them get on with it, right? My belief truly is that HR, i.e. connecting and leading and managing people, is a line function, okay? We use HR because they're specialists as part of the team to help us where we do not have the depth of knowledge and experience, right? But joint ownership now is starting to become a trend, which to me is really music to my ears. That just simply means that, as an example, myself, us engineers don't necessarily like to do the people stuff, okay? Because it's difficult, because it's just something we don't get taught or trained in terms of how to deal with that, how to handle it. I think the closest we come to that as engineers is a subject that you could either choose not to attend or attend. It was called Forum, and it was just discussions about life in general. That's about as close as we got to anything psychological, anything people related. Okay, we get taught in math, in thinking skills, and in technology. That's the bottom line. But joint ownership is definitely becoming a trend, so the whole business chips in and the whole business understands what strategic workforce planning is all about. You need to understand your skills within your organization, plus the mobility of that skill. What's the requirement of mobility? Okay, how do people want to move around your organization so that they can grow and develop? Can you and do you actually allow them and facilitate that process? That is really, really important. That also links back to your retention of critical skill, okay? The fourth trend is for you to incorporate external data in terms of where are people going, where will skill be available, what will happen with skill into the future, what kind of skill will be required and needed in the future, okay? So use that. That's not the alpha and the omega, but do use that. And on the next slide, you will see that I'm sharing some of that with you. Focusing on tasks, not jobs, is another critical trend that's starting to take place, where we take jobs apart and actually understand what it takes to actually deliver on that job, and rather focus on packaging those tasks into a person or getting that from one person. So those are the kind of trends. Next slide, Michaela. And here's the interesting one. This is recent research. These numbers indicate on the left-hand side, the bluish graph, right? This is the top 15 economies in the world, by the way. The labor shortages or surpluses in 2020, which is right where we are now, okay? All looks quite all right, except for Russia, Brazil, Germany, and South Korea, okay? They're already in a place where they've got too little skill for supporting their GDP growth. Here, I'm not even taking the impact of the pandemic into consideration, guys. This does not include COVID's impact, okay? If you look at the graph on the right-hand side, which is 10 years from today, okay? Look at the number of red, okay? Of the top 15 economies, more than 3/4 of them are going to be in a place where if they want to still keep on supporting their growth, they will have to look at life completely differently, okay? There's going to be a surprising global workforce and labor challenge. We are going to sit with too few people with the appropriate skill to do the work, okay? That's the interesting part. What is otherwise interesting is that there's a projection that there will be too little skill in the northern hemisphere and too much skill in the southern hemisphere. Can you imagine what this will do and what this will demand from governments, from countries, in terms of allowing migration or not of skills specifically? If Germany, for example, or Russia or Spain wants to support and maintain their growth that they're currently experiencing, they will have to buy in that skill from somewhere else. The next question is, will people be actually willing to move to certain parts of the world? Okay, that's another thing. Our mobility, we determine that as the labor force, if you want. And the other interesting thing is that there will be a higher level of skill missing or skill shortages at the more complex level of skill. So if you look at all of these things, guys, clearly this will have impact on us, not only as organizations, but most definitely it'll force us to rethink from a country perspective, okay? I think the tables are going to get turned a little bit, where currently if you want to immigrate to a specific country, you've got to go through all the hoops, right? I think that table is going to get turned around a little bit, where countries are going to have to go through certain hoops to actually convince you to come and join their team. Okay, so I think that is one of the aspects that could be seen to happen. Okay, just imagine this. What in practice does this mean for your organization? This does imply that in 10 years from today, you could be in a situation where you have to make a decision to actually stop or delay certain projects because you simply do not have the people to actually do those projects. That will be a very, very sad day indeed. Just in terms of the kind of skill that will be needed in future, and we'll get to that in a little bit more detail just now. Have you ever heard the name cognitive systems engineer? I've never heard of that before. I only recently heard about that. That's apparently a new field of engineering where you literally cross, again, the biology and biomedicine space with that of engineering, and then you become a cognitive systems engineer. We do not yet clearly understand, guys, what are the specific skills that we will need. Technical skills specifically are very unclear at this moment in time. Yes, I know that we will need data analysts and we will need people that will be able to take big mountains of data and make sense out of that. That's a pretty obvious one. The programmers will be needed and so forth. But anything else or additional skill that will come out of the woodwork, we are not sure yet. So it's almost like we're literally holding the plane's wings as we're going down from a skills perspective. So really think about what will the impact of this be in terms of your access to skills, okay? And if your skill is then mobile, what does that imply? What do you have to do as an organization to actually retain that skill? You've spent a lot of money on acquiring that skill. You probably have spent a chunk of money on developing that skill further. How do you make sure that those people stick around because they want to stick around, okay? And not migrate, for example, from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere because there's more of a pull over there, okay? Next slide, Michaela. So short of just labor, the third thing I wanted you to think about, the first one is digital strategy. The second thing was the whole issue of strategic workforce planning. The third thing here is communities. Guys, the fourth industrial revolution is impacting us as communities and society at large on very many different levels. Okay, equality, to my mind, actually has the opportunity now to widen. In other words, to become more unequal. The haves and the haves and don't haves in this world. That gap, there is a possibility that we can actually widen it. There's, for me, at this point in time, a general level of distrust or mistrust in any form of institution, right? Whether that's business or government, doesn't matter. If you look at what happens right across the world, it's not only a South Africa or an Africa thing, it happens essentially across the world, where people are distrusting the governance and the authorities and the structure that we have actually created. So that level of trust is a major, major aspect that needs to be addressed. There's dislocation because of the impact of tech, right? That impacts the current jobs that are in place. Now I get dislocated as a worker, as a laborer, as an input into that process, okay? What's the psychological impact of that? What's therefore then the run-through impact of that into the community and into the society? Everything becomes unstable, and I think that you will agree with me that a populist uprising in big parts of the world is not something that should be completely taken off the agenda. That was one of the risks that I also reflected on earlier when we spoke about the next big disaster, right? And then lastly, in terms of communities, there's the whole issue of privacy. Yes, I understand that we've got the POPI Act and all sorts of other governance in place to actually protect us as individuals, but I'm not sure that we are addressing that issue. The bottom line here, guys, in terms of communities is that as business, I think we are the so-called, let's call it the adult in the room or the adult in the relationship. We need to stand back, look at how we relate to the communities in the areas where we do business with, okay? And we need to question our current approach, and I still see this far too often, our current approach, which is that of a tick box that says, legally, I'm required to do this, therefore, I will go through the tick list and I will do what I need to do, and once I can tick that box, it's done, right? I think we need to challenge ourselves and take that relationship to a new place. That relationship needs to mature, that relationship needs to go to a next level, okay? What I'm saying in essence is that business and community should connect. Business should think about, how do I develop a business model that makes sense, right? And is profitable, but includes my community as a partner and a true partner in that sense. That's kind of the thing that I'm proposing. If we do not do that as business, I think the rumblings we've heard in the last number of years is only the beginning of a very, very painful journey over the longer term. That's my personal thinking. So my invite to you in terms of communities is think very, very carefully as to where do you operate? What's your relationship with the community? Okay. Is there any possibility that you could actually go and make a huge, huge effort, almost make it everybody's job, right? Like customer satisfaction, almost make it everybody's job that including our communities into what we do as business should become part of our job description, if you want, part of our responsibility, part of what we do, should become part of how we think about these things. There's, again, then the question that says, yeah, but you don't understand. This is business. It's not a charity. I fully understand that, okay? But just as has been proven over the last 30, 40 years, organizations that have decided to specifically focus on having their foundations built on sustainability, specifically the green stuff, the environmental stuff, okay? Those guys that have been on that journey for 20 plus years have proven beyond any doubt that they are now in a better position than they would have ever been had they decided not to go on this journey, let's call it about 20 years ago. I think we're at the same kind of place now. We used to think only environment, only things like air, water, earth, and so forth in the past. And I think to a large extent, there's a wave where organizations are taking responsibility for that. And I truly see a very responsible fashion in terms of how we do business, specifically in the very hard parts of the economy like mining, okay? I think the next thing is that we need to get to that realization that penny needs to drop for us as business in terms of communities as well. And we really need to understand that we don't only have stockholders, we have stakeholders, right? And part of that stakeholder landscape is our dear communities that we live and work within, okay? We choose to ignore this, guys, at our peril, and that's a real huge concern. So I'm inviting you, take the responsibility, right? Connect with the community. See how your strategy will change if you start including community as a specific key stakeholder in that landscape once you start doing your analysis and see where you go with your strat crafting and your strat development. Okay. Next slide, Michaela. All right, just a quick recap again. We started with digital strategy. We looked at strategic workforce planning. We spoke about communities. The last thing I just quickly want to touch on in terms of giving you enough firepower to actually not only survive, but thrive through this fourth industrial revolution. There's 4 categories, guys, or baskets or buckets, if you want, of skill that will be needed in the future. Exactly what those skills are going to look like, we don't know. We're not sure. Some of it's coming out of the woodwork, no doubt. This is, of course, apart from a technical skill of some sort, right? And a technical skill, when I refer to that, I'm talking about law or finance or engineering or medicine, whatever it is that you're good at, your technical skill. So that underpins all of this, okay? The kind of skills or the groupings of skills is clearly on the left-hand side, the digital skill, okay? So you need to be able to become digital savvy, no doubt about that. What that digital savviness means, you've got to make a call about. Again, there, I would suggest that you check out the market and see what the trends say and see what the specific indications are in terms of what specific skill will be required in digital. Clearly, there's data management skill required, there's programming skill required, there's cybersecurity skill required, there's cloud skill required, there's all sorts of skills required in that specific space. Choose one, I think, from a personal level and start getting real good at it. Cognitive ability, or the cognitive basket of skills, if you want, I think that's going to be one of our saving graces as human beings, okay? The digital skill is easy to identify and it's easy to develop. The cognitive skill in terms of complex problem solving, I think, is still going to be a long, long way off before AI, for example, will be able to take that over from us. So creativity, innovation, complex problem solving, making links, the interdependencies, systems thinking, that kind of thing is what will differentiate us from machine, I think, in the end. So make sure that you understand what cognitive skill is all about and go and develop specific sets of that skill so that you can become known and famous for that, okay? The social skill, we are not hermits. We are indeed pack animals. We are social animals. We are herd animals. We need that for our survival, okay? And that's the one specific skill in terms of leading others, leading self and others, okay? Influencing people, convincing people of certain viewpoints, right? Collaboration, connection, and so forth, and taking all sorts of contribution that can be made by various people in moving that forward. Then there's a fourth bucket of skill, and that's all about resilience. And this is about very, very personal stuff, guys. Here I'm talking about how aware are you, for example, on a day-to-day basis of the emotional state that you are in or that you are going through, for example. Okay, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about there. We need resilient individuals within organizations, because I truly believe organizations are driven by us as people, okay? There is tech and there is machinery and equipment and all sorts of things, but we as individuals have to go through that psychological or emotional journey every time change happens, and that's where resilience as a skill will become absolutely critical. So that's about mindset, it's about awareness, it's about how you do what you do, it's about what you choose to focus on to do. Next slide, Michaela. And here's just a quick reference on the next slide of what does that mean? What does the resilience mean in terms of specific skill and specific capability? You can go to the next one. In this new world, we need guys that are contributors, okay? So going from consuming to contributing, going from just using to making, okay? Contributing to others. We need people that can collaborate. We need people that can connect and dependently and independently operate with others. We need critical thinkers, guys, from default thinking, which we all used to. We are in such a rut to actually making meaning, new ways of thinking. I always ask the research students, so what does the data say and what does the data mean? It's that meaning part, okay? We need people that are conscious and not distracted, okay? We need people that are continually, absolutely, naturally curious and can't wait to go and figure out the next big thing or the next interconnection. We need people that are naturally creative. And by the way, we are all incredibly, incredibly creative. The system and the process obviously kind of almost pushes that out of us, okay, because of the way it is, but we are all absolutely magnificently creative. We need courageous people that can be bold and can be actually authentic and do what they truly believe they were placed on this earth to do. And we also need people that can actually navigate all of us through this maze. So that's just in a nutshell, guys. 4 things I wanted to touch on. Digital strategy, go and do that. The second thing is all about strategic workforce planning. Please, please, please watch out. There's a wall coming. It's only 10 years away. And when I last checked, it still takes you roughly 7 years to grow an engineer, okay? 5 years, maybe 6 years to grow a person that does anything with their hands, okay? It takes 8 years, 9 years to grow a doctor. So we haven't got an awful lot of time. If we can define those skills for the future, we will be able to position ourselves such that we are ready for that we not only know what those skills probably are going to be, but that we're ready as an organization in having actually shaped that. Okay, so I hope that helped a little bit. And I just wanted to conclude and then give you some takeaways. Next slide, Michaela. I think that slide says it all. The response window, guys, for a crisis is typically measured in months, while the recovery, and this is how long it's going to take us, is typically measured in years. So the companies that are well prepared will always be in a position where they will bounce back quicker and they will recover much, much faster. So just in summary, and as a takeaway for you, yes, in order to survive and thrive in the 4th Industrial Revolution, you've got to do all the obvious technical stuff that we spoke about, right? But there's 4 things that I think we don't put enough attention on. The first thing clearly is that of integrating or making sure that you understand what digital strategy is for your organization. The second thing is concern yourself about your people. What are the future skills? How do you make sure that you're positioned appropriately to have enough of that skill on board when you need it? The third thing is you ignore your communities at your peril. And the fourth thing is go right down to a personal level. Understand what those buckets of skills are. Digital, cognitive, social, but the most pertinent one is that bucket of skill referring to resilience specifically. How do you develop that? Go and develop that as an individual so that you not only get yourself through this little bit of a rough waters, if you want, but so that you can contribute in terms of your team and your organization to get all of you through this as well, and that you grow and you get out better on the other side. so that you still are on that so-called top 500 list of organizations after all of this is over. Kobus, thank you so much. I think we can take questions.
Wow, Jacques, yeah, thank you so much. You've packed so much, what's the word I'm looking for? Substance into, a very short space of time. And I mean, each one of those areas that you covered, by itself, each one of them alone, we can have a wonderful discussion and deliberation on for an entire day. But you provided us with a succinct overview of the, the tech drivers, the mega trends of 4IR, and reminded us about these developments that sometimes we might be oblivious about or just not aware, and the not being outside only, but moving inside as well. That confluence of the biological and the technological. So when you were talking about that, I was thinking about a documentary I saw recently, and perhaps people would really, I can just recommend it, and maybe it could serve as a case study for us to discuss at a next event. It's called The Social Dilemma, and maybe some of you have seen it already, about some of these tech giants, what they are saying on the one end, and what they are actually doing on the other end with some hidden agendas. So just a margin entry for those who would like to have a look at that, and maybe we can have a debate or a discussion going forward. Then you reminded us, not in terms of the short-term risks, but definitely not to ignore the longer term. And within the digital strategy space, looking at digitization on the one end, but also digitalization, because they are different things. And people should really go and Google the definition of digitization and digitalization. As you said, it's not about taking a piece of paper and then just digitizing it and putting, now you've got a digital strategy. Then there's the transformation part, the digital, that of people and culture, and along with that, the whole strategic workforce planning. And it came out strongly for me is getting the right people on the bus. And I mean, Joe Collins reminded us about that already years and years ago. But going forward, it's going to become so much more important. And Joe, then the global workforce crisis, the emphasis there was on Europe, the Americas, and Asia Pacific. And Mhlaba Nesini asked the question if perhaps you are aware of if there are similar data on how developing countries are actually bleeding skills now, and how that will be like in 2030. I don't know if you perhaps have a response to that.
I don't have data. Unfortunately, that data was done for the top 15 economies in the world, and that's the reflection I gave. But guys, the benefit for us and what we need to capitalize on as Africa, remember I said there's going to be a shift in terms of skill deficit in the north and skill too much in the south. Okay, and that's what we can capitalize on. If we box clever as the southern hemisphere, right, and we get our ducks in a row and we actually go and develop that skill, obviously taking a chance and saying, listen, what do we think the skill is going to be? Guys, if you're 80% right, you're much better off than anybody else. Okay, so what I'm saying is take your chances, figure out what those skills are, and let us start developing those skills. We haven't got time, right? There's a very short window of opportunity here. But if we can develop those skills and then export into the northern hemisphere, can you imagine what kind of an impact, for example, Africa could have on Europe or on the States or on the East? Okay, that's the kind of thing. So I just know that Africa has got an opportunity here, and that's what we need to capitalize on. But the data, I haven't come across it. If I do, I will definitely let you know.
Thank you so much.
There was a question there
I think absolutely.
Whether these skills are
Jacques,
teachable.
Go for it.
There was a question there about whether these skills are teachable. Yes, most definitely they are teachable, specifically the cognitive skills and the resilience skills. There was a book published by Debbie Craig 3 weeks ago, was it? And the book's title is Power Up 8, where she takes the entire skill set of resilience, right? And she unpacks that in practical fashion and gives tips and tricks in terms of how you could actually go and develop that skill. She even now offers a program, a course, to develop that specific skill. So is it teachable? Yes, most definitely. You can go and develop that skill as an individual. Critically important, I think, for organizations. We've been teaching, call it change management skill or transformational leadership skill, right, for many, many years. We are now integrating this resilience as a separate skill set in that entire bigger picture. So yeah, it's most definitely teachable. And remember that as an organization, once you've got that capability, you've got it. So you're ready for the next disaster, whatever that might be. If some tectonic plate slips off from a part of the world and makes a big wave that comes and hits us, whatever it is, the thing is you will be resilient enough as an organization because of what you built into your individuals to actually get through that kind of a challenge.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Jacques, and you reminded us as well about the impact on the communities, the issues around equality and trust, the instability, populist uprising, and again the very important thing about privacy. And you emphasize the importance of the relationship with communities that businesses find themselves in. This, call it the social contract, and that there is something that needs to be really prominent on our strategic agendas. And that led us on to the future skill that's required, and there's been quite a bit of discussion in the discussion column around these things. But I quite like the succinctly putting them into 4 baskets, as you've said, that of digital and of cognitive and social and resilience, which then also flows into the 8 identity shifts, which are critical capabilities. So, I think, perhaps just, there's so much value in what you've presented to us, and these kinds of discussions, I think, need to be a more frequent one, because for me, it's in dialogue that we move over and establish the action plans.
Yes.
And personally, I believe there's a dire need for practical wisdom, phronesis.
Yes.
Now, that's also a discussion for another day, but I collectively can draw everything into that orientation, or that pursuit, or that thinking, and that reasoning, and so forth. If you just consider where we find ourselves in, and believing that tomorrow is beautiful, at the subliminal level, the energy that it unlocks for one to become a positive influence and impact in realizing this future that we all are aspiring to. So maybe, Jacques, we can also have a look at Mhlaba Niseni's comment there on the practicality of adoption and use in places like RSA, where we move from a very low skills base. How many persons with these skills would take us to the tipping point of getting the majority of the country to move and to benefit? And that aligns, probably with the earlier comment made around the potential that we have as a country, but also as a continent. I don't know if you have a comment there, perhaps, Jacques.
Yes, what we always have this discussion when we talk in strategy about culture change. And my question to our team is always, okay, so how many people do I have to convince to start, behaving in a different fashion so that we can create this new culture? And the thinking is always that it needs to be large numbers, 50% plus kind of thing. Okay, let me just cut the story very short. You need single-figure numbers to start converting before you see the cracks in the damn wall. Okay, so I'm talking about roughly 10, 11% of people. Once you've convinced or converted 10 to 11% of people, you will most definitely start seeing a wave forming and shaping. Okay, so you don't need to train 90% of people. You really don't. You start small, you do what you can, and you start disseminating that information and that skill. Okay, and carry on with that. There's a book that was written by Gladwell, I think it was, Chris, just help me here, The Tipping Point. okay, where he talks specifically about viruses and how those things propagate, and then us connecting as human beings, that relationship and how that works. Amazing stuff. And there he also refers to the very low percentage of people that you need to convert or convince before they start really becoming advocates of your cause. And that's what we need to be pertinent about. I'm now doing this resilience development. And for me, I just wanted to share a practical tip again. What's the very first step in terms of you becoming more resilient? It's a level of awareness that you need to develop in terms of where you are regarding your state, your physical and emotional state. Okay. Once your mind starts going off down a rabbit hole in terms of all sorts of negative thinking, this is the baddest thing that could ever happen. It's never going to end. It's only going to end in disaster, blah, 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 that kind of thinking. Once you can arrest yourself, stand back, take a deep breath, become aware of those emotions, right? That's the very, very first step. Try that. Check yourself out for the next week and see what state do you spend your time in. Are you, generally happy, or are you generally disheartened? And start asking questions about that. Okay. If I'm generally a little bit more disheartened, and please go have a look at the stats. The stats tell me that you are much more disheartened than you are happy. Okay. 70% plus of those thoughts that we've got are negative thoughts. It takes you down a rabbit hole where you don't want to go. Awareness gets you to a place where you realize that. And remember that you've got a choice in terms of how you change that thinking and those thinking patterns. Okay. So that's just a practical thing again.
Thanks, Jacques. Thank you. I'm just also seeing an interesting observation by Machemo. Speaking of that, the COVID app as well. Lots of people are against downloading it for fear of how sensitive the info that can be exposed is. Actually, last night we were talking about it after the president's the talk over the radio. I listened to it over the radio, and it within the family again become a topic of discussion. And one wonders, and we don't have the time to consider that, but we are, as people, the global population, individuals, on a day-to-day basis, we are fed with information. We are given the information through all our social, everywhere, wherever it comes from. And there's so much of it fake, and some scientific and some whatever. So there's an app. We see an app on the screen of a phone, but what sits behind it, and what's the actual intent? That type of thing. But again, the issue of privacy and so forth. But that's also the discussion for another day. Jacques, that's not you, Jacques. The other Jacques, I see there. Very important comment made. This discussions and talk has to be foregrounded in SA, in future governmental NDPs, as well as corporate integrated statements. Otherwise, it remains intellectual conversations. So, again, just relating it back to the practical wisdom, who is oriented towards action. You can have the brightest brains in the world, come up with the brightest plans in the world, but if it doesn't translate to action, what are we doing? So, Jacques, thanks for that comment. It's absolutely true. And maybe, as we part from this discussion, please share with us ways that you believe that we can become a measurable, having a more impact in what we do in creating the change. There's another comment there. Historically, been releasing into the economy fewer skills than people that sign up for courses, and can this problem be resolved in the short term? Jacques, I don't know what your view is on that. On the short term, I think you already touched on in your comment about starting with the self.
Absolutely. If we start with the self, it is short-term stuff. Okay. If you become aware of where you are lacking in terms of these new skills, and you can start a journey to go and develop that happens rapidly, guys. Then convince the organization, because remember, our organizations are made up of us. Okay. Organizations are made up of people. We need to develop that skill most definitely. So it doesn't need to take years. I think you and I, Kobus, still have to have the discussion, and we do, but education per se is in trouble because loads of shifts are happening.
Yeah.
We need to move with that. Okay. I now see that people
Absolutely.
most definitely want 15-minute lectures as opposed to 4-hour lectures, right? So our traditional approach of 3 to 4 hour lectures is not going to cut it anymore. We need to do something differently. So yeah, can be done in the short term.
Yeah.
Think of those 4 things that I shared with you guys. Digital strat, plan your workforce properly, okay? Think on communities and connect with community. And then lastly, go develop those personal individual skills. That's where you start. Start with yourself, okay? And your probability of success in terms of making it through 4IR will be much, much higher. Thank you, Cobus. Much appreciated. Thank you. It was a privilege to be here and chat with you guys today.
Jacques, it was wonderful having you. Thank you so much. And we're looking forward to journeying together into the future, and with everyone that's joined us today in our virtual auditorium. And please remember, this event is recorded, so you're most welcome afterwards to look at it again and to share it as widely as you want to, which is all contributing to our aspirations to make our mantra of tomorrow is beautiful, to make that a reality. So to everyone, thank you again so much. Take care, and let us part with the notion that tomorrow is beautiful. Thank you so much. We appreciate every one of you. Take care. Bye-bye.